Bill, tell us how to write some good specs for WASI.
Hello. Um, yeah, writing good specs is very hard. So I'll not be able to give you a comprehensive overview of here are all the things you need to do to write a good spec because it is just fundamentally very hard. What I do want to talk about is some tooling I built to make sort of the the act of um, creating specifications a bit easier because I do think that that is a major issue to overcome. Um, to explain this, just so this is just a view of the WASI HTTP proposal. We have actually for the P2 version these markdown renderings of the WIT files here. Um, and the WIT files at times, or the symbols in the WIT files contain doc comments, but that's basically, so these two things are basically what we have. And really, again, the markdown files are just generated from this. So this is the spec we have for WASI HTTP. These for P2, these three WIT files. For P3, it's these two files. And then the dependencies tracked here. That doesn't give implementers nearly everything they need to actually implement interoperable specifications. To demonstrate that or show what other spaces do, here's the fetch spec for JavaScript or the DOM implemented in browsers, and by now actually most outside the browser JavaScript runtimes as well. Um, Contains lots and lots of sort of infrastructure things, and then specification of the fetch API, including kind of an overview, non-normative notes for user or for developers using these APIs and so on. And then the web built-ins uses IDL called web IDL. And so the web IDL definition for built-ins, I'll take the request one here, for example. And then if you look at the constructor here, you see something that we are missing. You see the algorithm needed to implement the constructor of request. And it's all kind of, it's this ordered list where if you want to make use of it or refer to it, you can in detail, obviously, well, read it, but also have these nice features such as the ability to highlight things. There are references to other concepts that are being invoked. And for example, here, if you click on one of those, then you get a jump to the definition. If you click on the definition, you get a list of references to this to this concept. As you can see, the concept of request is shockingly used a lot in the fetch spec. We're pretty fundamentally missing. But basically, what we have is much more focused on these non-normative nodes, information about how to use the API, which is what should go in doc comments. I'll just quickly show for the WebAssembly core specification, that is what this looks like. It's a slightly different format from the fetch spec, but fundamentally it also has a similar kind of setup. So what I built is starting with the first view, a viewer where this is the exact same content as in the WIT interface I showed earlier, except with a few things added to it, sort of a lot of kind of boilerplate. As you can see, it already looks kind of like a spec. But it's actually focused on documentation. Normative specification is here, except not actually implemented. But it's kind of hidden by default. I think that's actually already kind of a nice improvement. And as you can see in the URL, this is actually referring to exactly the proposal I showed earlier. There is nothing custom here. It's all generated from this. How is it generated? If I click on edit here, I get something else. I get the edit view. I can also here click on view real quick. That shows almost the same thing as the documentation thing, except this time the normative specifications are open. It's really just, I just want to read the spec. I don't want to work on it, but I don't just want to read the documentation either. Okay, but back to editing. This all, so now we have the WIT interfaces or files from earlier. We also now have a spec.md file, and that contains lots of to-dos. And we can do something like I can type, but let's ignore that. I really can't type. And now we have this. I just put it as a bad example because it's now linking. Sorry, I'll add it. So anyway, the key point is we get something very similar to the output before. We can refer to other concepts here as well. Those will get auto-linked and all that. And if I reload this, this is all persisted, as you can see. How is it persisted? It's so basically, if I close the spec, I can see it created lots and lots of snapshots of this specification. But let's delete all of these. And now I'll go back and reload. And you saw really quickly what it did was it looked for WIT files in the URL I gave to the proposal. Then it saw, okay, there are WIT files. There's also a deps.toml file in there. I'll basically spider from here, discover all the dependencies, load all of those, and then interpret all that, and then scaffold this spec.md document. And ultimately, here, this is just a previewer that's automatically generated from the WIT files and the spec.md file based on information in the specwit.toml file. Specwit is a name I gave this tool. Yeah, so all of this, all that existed before I reloaded here were these WIT files and the deps.toml file, nothing else. So this is all generated, but I can edit it now. Right now, the flow, if I want to actually commit something, would be that I download a zip file, open and add that to some local Git checkout and open a pull request. Ultimately, maybe we can do a bit of a better integration with GitHub authentication. I don't know yet. All of this is also available as a CLI tool. So there's a SpecWit CLI tool. And this is really just an online interface for it. The SpecWit tool allows you to do SpecWit create, or new, I think, spec with sync, where it reads a WIT file, sees whether there are added or changed or removed symbols in it, and then updates the outline of the spec.md file, just fitting in new things, remove things, but retaining otherwise the content. There's spec with serve, which, and I guess this is actually another part. You can see respec here. This is generated by by the same framework as the WebAssembly core specification uses, called respec, which does all of the symbol linking and tracking and so on. I just remembered. So we also have these permalink tables and so on. That is all maintained by SpecWid, by respec, based on information that SpecWid assembles and gives it, and ultimately spits out an input file that respec can then use and render the specification. So all that part I didn't have to do myself. To me, key point in this is all of these things like cross references and so on, including, I just realized, I should show, so we have here an import of an external symbol from another spec. If I click on that, I apparently broke this. I pushed an update earlier with some bug fixes, but I apparently broke the cross-linking. We'll have to fix that. Normally, it should have gotten you to a viewer for the that's navigated to the duration symbol in the clock spec. That's apparently broken right now. None of this in general is yet public because this is kind of a sneak peek for two reasons. One, I have some kind of obvious showstopper bugs to fix, such as some of this is actually some of the boilerplate in the documents is really just blind copy, nothing useful. I want to fix those things, and I want to present this to the WASI subgroup, because obviously, ultimately, I hope that people working in that group will make use of this to actually write specifications. Again, this is fundamentally and just intrinsically hard task, but I think with this kind of tooling, it's easier to get a start and to actually also see how are their specs structured. So would be very interested in, I guess in particular, once I make it public, I'll share that into the getting feedback, but also, and I'll stop sharing here, would love to hear people's thoughts on this in general.
I will allow 2 minutes of questions before we go to the wrap-up session.
I like how much more professional it looks. Looks like we're making real specs, so that's a great job.
Oh, one thing I forgot is, yes, as Bailey mentions, populated WASI dev. So what I'm imagining is that we could have links such as docs.wasidev /WASI HTTP or /HTTP and or edit.wasidev /HTTP, things like that, and have that be integrated there.
We have 2 questions from Dave. Hopefully no one hears the dog in my microphone. There's 2 questions from Dave. First of which, how do you see the POSIX interfaces like file system or sockets being specified? I like the level of detail of the web specs, but for those POSIX-like interfaces, it ultimately boils down to we expose whatever the OS does with all of its quirks and oddities.
That's to some degree where the fundamentally hard part comes in, and it's not just writing spec algorithms is just difficult, because it's kind of like programming, except you can't run the result, and you have to hope that other people will do and then inform you of maybe bugs in your program that you have. We, in addition, will have the issue that we don't even yet have very hard answers to where does the scope of WASI start or end. What do we bottom out in within WASI and say the rest is kind of implementation defined or specified over here, which for HTTP, that's going to be the answer for in a lot of cases, but for WASI KV, there's no specification to be had. So but also we can't fully define the exact semantics of every operation to the very end, because then it's unimplementable in terms of real world implementations of key-value stores. So difficult questions to answer here, and for file systems, the same applies, obviously, but we don't know yet.
And there's a second question. Do we need to maintain this separately from the WIT files, or can it be integrated into the WITs themselves, or vice versa, to remove the double bookkeeping?
Initially, we actually tried to make this work. We had support for wit.md files, which were sort of little bit programming style interspersed documentation with code blocks, and it didn't work for various reasons that I think would take too much time to talk through. I actually think it is good for the WIT files to focus on describing the interface, and doc comments I think make sense in there, and then the lower level specification to have that in a separate document that not everybody ever needs to see. It's just, if you're a developer, you don't need using an API, you don't need the specification. It might make sense to have links to that, like MDN for web specs has links to the specification for everything it documents. But having that in the same document, I think, isn't actually desirable, because that would make the WIT spec for HTTP a very, very long document indeed, once we actually have a properly filled out spec. And so I think having these side by side would be good. Oh, and obviously my hope would be that eventually these spec.md files and the spec with manifests can also be in the WASI repo next to the WIT files in the same place. They shouldn't be maintained elsewhere.